With the world apparently falling apart every 30 seconds, you might start to ask yourself some important questions. Is your wilderness survival merit badge good enough to protect you from a zombie apocalypse? Do you live close enough to a major city that you won't need to worry about surviving a nuclear winter? If life is so precious and could be cut short at any moment, then why are you spending so much time on YouTube? Just kidding, come back. I need you to watch my stuff. But let's just say you're an opportunist, someone who sees all the hysteria as a great chance to sell radiation-proof underwear, or tell a story about the world after the mushroom cloud hits the fan. How do we tell this story? How many layers do we want to add to this uranium yellow cake to make it sizzle? How high do we need to turn the creepometer for optimal impact? And how many explosion references can I make before this video gets flagged by YouTube? To find out, we'll be exploring 3 major steps for creating a dystopian story by taking another look at Fallout, but not just the TV show. I'm going to cherry pick some aspects from the games as well so we have a fuller picture as to what dystopian stories can be, while also upsetting a larger swath of the internet. We're doing this because even though the games and show all happen in the same post-nuclear war America, and they all have similar messages, and they all have a somewhat similar look, each story has its own unique feel about it. Which brings us to point number 1. When brainstorming your story idea, you need to consider something that I loathe more than vegetables in the dentist, and that is your theme and tone. I know, trust me, I feel gross just for saying that. But look, before we all dropped out of high school and joined the circus, we were vaguely taught by someone who hated their job that theme was the message your story was trying to say, and that tone was how your story said it. Whatever that means. Theme is just a fancy way of saying the internal conflict your hero is facing. Should I save my dad or save the world? Should I save this girl or save myself? Should I keep working on this YouTube video or roll around in a kiddie pool full of melted chocolate chip ice cream? Tone is... well, actually, they got tone right. It's just how dark or humorous your story feels. The road is post-apocalyptic and makes you feel realistically hopeless, whereas Adventure Time also takes place after a nuclear war, but it tickles my feel-goods. Not like that. But why should we care about these aspects of a story? Think of it this way. Let's say we're trying to hit a target with a bow and arrow. We can go in dry, take a few shots, see where they go, and fine-tune our aim until we hit the target. Or we can stand point blank in front of the target, pull back the bowstring with the arrow tip on the bullseye, walk backwards for 25 yards, and finally take the shot. Starting with a story's theme is the latter approach, working backwards to figure out a good place to start so our story goes where we want it to go. If you're telling a story about an imperfect society, you want to tell it in a way that is clear and emotionally engaging. Otherwise, you're just banging around, making a bunch of noise without anything coherent to say, and nothing gets accomplished, at which point you might as well just become a politician. They get paid way more. Good decision. So, to prevent becoming an unpaid politician, let's look at the themes for both Fallout stories, and go from there. The world of Fallout in the show can be boiled down to a simple concept that greed is no bueno. Greed is why Vault-Tec needed the atomic war to happen. Greed is why they were willing to go so far as to drop the first bomb. Greed is why Hank blew up Shady Sands. The theme is that greed can really botch things up. Now, compare that to the stories from the games, where we have anything from people creating super mutant armies, factions trying to take over the Hoover Dam, a robot president trying to purify the world with poison, and Ron Perlman voice acting as the Lich, combining Fallout and the Adventure Time universes together. The theme, while illustrated several different ways, is that war never changes, that everything eventually devolves into fighting for control. With both of those overarching themes in mind, if you plot me down in the middle of a wasteland, there are a lot of different ideas you can explore, ranging from surviving in a radioactive hellscape, the darkness within humanity, the need for community, and how that can devolve into a cult or toxic dogma, or what happens when leaders lose their way. It's a lot like waking up in Washington, D.C. and deciding what you want to do for the day. The key word there is decide. In a made-up world with endless possibilities, you, the writer, need to pick what to focus on. Yes, you can have a B-plot. Yes, you can write a series exploring different themes. Yes, you can have side characters that explore other themes to a lesser extent within your main story. But if you don't focus on one central theme, your story turns into a narrative orgy, which isn't as fun as it sounds. Here you are as the writer, trying to finish every story thread, but at the end of the day, your mouth is dry, your hands hurt, everything from your nipples down is bruised, and nobody is satisfied. By committing to a sole theme, you can focus your energies on telling that story well, and telling it to completion. The next question you'll need to ask yourself is how you want to tell that story. And I don't mean do you want to tell it as a video game, TV show, or book. I mean do you want your story to be bleak, darkly humorous, optimistic, or whatever you feel you have to say about the end of the world. This is your tone if you're following along. If you are old enough to have played the original Fallout games where everything was sad and dead and futile, then you were definitely disappointed with the TV show, which had notes of optimism and glimmers of hope. Bastards, I know. How dare they? Even having only played Fallout 3 in New Vegas, I was very upset with seeing anything green and leafy in the show, partly because the only thing green in Fallout 3 was Harold and Bob, and also because of my hatred of vegetables. I mean, there is a deer in the show. Dog meat was the only thing soft and fluffy in the games that wasn't trying to kill you. Don't worry, I'm not actually upset. I'm just saying that the show has some dark humor, but it never gives the impression that life after the nuclear war is completely empty of any sort of happiness. Overall, it's kind of like the games, but it doesn't have the same feel as the games. When telling your own story, this is something you'll want to consider. How dark or lighthearted is your look at the end of the world? Is it hopeful like the show or Fallout 3? Do I finish the game and feel accomplished but betrayed like the original Fallout or whenever my cat asks for belly rubs? How often do I laugh? Why do I laugh? Are moments of levity immediately followed by heavy truths that rip me back into reality? Just like your imaginary dating life, you need to decide how much excitement, dependability, trust, and drama you want to have, ultimately creating a story that keeps you on your toes even when you're on your back. In any case, it's best you make that decision early, or else step number 2 is going to be an even bigger pain in the sausage and grapes, because you need to consider how the finer details of your world building are going to put pressure on your theme, aka your character dilemma. And I know, some of you are thinking,
None of this sounds fun at all. I just want to write a dystopian story with mutant turtles that fight robots while I lather myself up with butter. I don't care about themes and actually doing work.
and that's fine. Write a turd sandwich and bring it to an orgy with all your relatives where even your own mom won't lie and say it's a good story. But if you want to tell a decent story, sometimes you've got to do some thinking and planning. Now, look, at a fundamental level, your story will come down to your main character's arc, but if you don't know how your character should change or what might cause them to change, then you're swimming blindfolded and naked in a piranha tank. You don't know where you're trying to go, and you are slowly dying from a bunch of tiny holes in your story logic. In the Fallout show, Lucy is a naive vault dweller whose moral dilemma comes down to staying a good person while the people, robots, and even the water of the Wasteland wants to kill her. The outside world puts pressure on her dilemma. Is it worth being a good person if it gets in the way of your survival and what you want? Similarly, Max's moral dilemma comes down to getting what he wants and trying to survive. But, unlike Lucy, Maximus is less naive and more deceptive. With Lucy, we ask ourselves, can she be broken down to the mentality of a wastelander? But with Maximus, we ask ourselves, can he raise himself up to the morality of a vault dweller? In both cases, the hostile world of post-nuclear war America is what threatens our characters. Now the question is, what finer aspects of the story world influence who Lucy and Max eventually become? Both characters live in the same major story world, but the finer aspects of their story world test their specific character conundrums. Lucy's dad breaks her trust, a trust which was formed in a cult-like community of Stockholm Syndrome children, causing her to question everything she has built her moral backbone on, whereas the Brotherhood of Steel tests Max's character by offering him either the appearance of a hero in a dope metal suit, or the opportunity to actually be heroic. That difference in our hero's moral compass and external pressure creates two completely different character arcs, and it's why these finer details are important to consider before getting elbows deep into your story. External pressures guide and force our character's trajectory. If we don't consider what fun, unique pressures we might experience in a dystopian landscape, we are missing an opportunity to have our story stand out and impact our audience. These external pressures are excellent opportunities to let your imagination get weird, because in what other world can you have vault dwellers? In what other world can you have a militia of technology protecting super knights? This is where all those crazy thoughts your therapist warned you to keep private can really shine, so have some fun and make something special. Anyway, back to the main point. What would happen if we removed the smaller details which exist specifically to test our character dilemma? Well, we get the games. And while the games ask moral questions like, should you unpeople everyone in the area with radiation poisoning, or should you just fix the water filter, the main goal is to entertain its players. Rather than focusing on moral dilemmas, the games ask, do you want to build a teddy bear rocket launcher? Do you want to pimp out this body armor? Do you want to collect bobbleheads with your bestest buddy Dogmeat while hunting super mutants? They lean heavily on concept, and while I remember dumping a few hundred hours into the games, I never felt emotionally attached to any of the characters. I mean, hell, the main characters never even have names because their function isn't to change internally. Their function is to let me goof off in a nuclear hellscape to provide me with more of an experience and less of an emotional pull. And that brings us to the final point in writing dystopian stories, which is that once you have determined a theme, and you've played with some finer story details to add pressure to this theme, then it's time to create a character whose circumstances best allows you to emotionally explore this theme. Let's break out the drawing supplies. So how do we test a character's idealistic moral compass in Washington? After the apocalypse. How could they even have reached adulthood without having this compass be tainted by the evil of the Wasteland? Well, we just hide them away in a vault for 18 years before giving them a good reason to leave. Okay, but then what? How do we pressure their view of morality outside of the vault without getting them murdered? Let's give them some guides. We can give them a nice turtley guide, a cutthroat ghoul guide, and a shiny, morally ambiguous guide. Seems vaguely familiar, doesn't it? Each of these guides can help our character face a new challenge, or put her directly in harm's way, leaving our character to make a moral choice, deciding to stick to the high road or sink to the level of their guide. Then, once we've challenged our hero, really tested her moral code, and proven she's lawfully good, let's strip away all of her guides, all of her support, and kick her as hard as we can by destroying her role model and showing her how poorly her mother has aged in the last decade or so. Now we can ask Lucy's ultimate question as to whether or not it is possible to stay a good person in a post-apocalyptic world while also trying to stay, alive. See how these pieces fall into place a little bit easier since we know where we want to go with our character? No, it's not quite this easy when you're staring down the barrel of a blank piece of paper. Telling the story is still difficult, but it keeps you from endlessly wandering around your story world without making any progress, or worse, writing a whole story and realizing you didn't manage to say or accomplish anything you set out to do. This goes for any story. Make sure you know what you are trying to say with your story. Create external stresses that really emphasize this message. Then make a character who fits the role. A character that would experience the most compelling emotional choice in your story's dilemma. This way, you ensure that you're writing a story that not only takes place in a cerebrally stimulating world, but also you are making a character that tells this story in an emotionally engaging way. So, as always, grab your sketchpad, have a good brainstorming session, and find some distinctive ways to create the best end of the world story possible. Do 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 do. The end.